twice in a week's time. Passing an annual State Department authorization bill is one of the fundamental responsibilities of this committee. And when we shirk that responsibility and decline to exercise our oversight, we in essence surrender our authority to the executive branch and to other congressional committees, and we fail to do the job our constituents sent us here to do. Restoring this annual practice was a top priority of mine when I became chairman, and I'm proud of the significant progress we made last year when the first authorization bill in 14 years became law, and I want to thank Senator Cardin and everybody on this committee for making that happen. However, because of previous inaction, there are programs at the department that have not been appropriately reviewed and analyzed in well over a decade. This lack of oversight results in uncertain policy goals, wasteful spending, and a lack of transparency. This year's state authorization contains numerous important provisions that build upon last year's bill and exercising oversight of the State Department bureaucracy and government programs that spend billions of dollars in taxpayer money. We also understand that this legislation is being crafted in the early stages of the department's plans for reorganization. And we expect that the reorganization will be a topic of a good bit of our conversation today. We're pleased that you have come before us to speak about the process underway to reorganize the department, and you being here is further evidence of the new administration's commitment to openness, to input, and to consultation with Congress. And I again appreciate the 45 minutes or so you spent with Ben and I last week before the hearing. Rather than being a hindrance to the Secretary as he assesses the future structure of the department, I believe this authorization is a tool that will assist the administration in its work while also serving as a mechanism by which Congress can assist in improving how the department functions. Ranking Member Cardin and I and our respective staffs worked together successfully in the past 2 years to pass authorization bills out of committee and get a combination of those two bills signed into law. Again, I want to thank you, Senator Cardin, for your dedication to making sure this committee continues to fulfill its duty this year as well. I want to thank all of our members for their cooperation and important contributions in the process. We're here today to discuss the committee's draft authorization bill that we've shared with everyone, and we look forward to hearing your views. Thank you again, and I'll turn it over to our distinguished ranking member.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Secretary Sullivan, thank you for returning to our committee. I guess we treated you well enough the last time you came back so soon. It's always a pleasure to have you here. This is an extremely important hearing, the review of the State Department reauthorization bill for FY18, as well as the State Department's reorganization plans. Chairman Corker has laid out what both of us feel very passionately about, and that is Congress has a responsibility to authorize the programs at the State Department, and it's the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is the committee that needs to do that work. You know, we watch what the Armed Services Committee does with the National Defense Authorization Act, which is a very important bill, and we recognize that a lot of issues that should come through this committee, we need to look at the NDA bill in order to try to get a vehicle to get those issues into statute. We should have our own opportunity to do that. And under Chairman Corker's leadership, we were able to get an important bill done in the last Congress, and we look forward to your help in establishing that principle. So the draft legislation we're looking at deals with the organization of the Department of State. It deals with embassy construction. It deals with personnel issues, diversity, information security, public diplomacy, anti-corruption, and other related issues. It's more ambitious than I would say the bill we had the last time, and it keeps building on what we believe is the appropriate role, but we do need your help. Now, it is complicated because there's a new administration, and there's also a listening tour going on and a reorganization going on. So you have committed to us that we, the Congress, this committee, will be a part of that consultation as you look at the reorganization of the Department of State. How we handle the state authorization needs to be consistent with congressional input into the reorganization. So that presents an additional challenge. When we had the hearing on this year's TIP report, I went over the fact that there had been press reports that Consular Affairs and the Bureau of Population, Refugee, and Migration was being considered for transfer to the Department of Homeland Security or being abolished. and raised serious questions as to whether that was advisable. We also know the discussion of whether USAID would maintain its quasi-independence. These are issues that obviously this committee has great interest, and as we look at state authorization and reorganization, it's important that we understand how these issues are being contemplated. And then we have an area that has me greatly concerned, and the reduction of the workforce by attrition. To me, that's a non-strategic way to reduce the numbers at the State Department based upon who retires, and could very well compromise the ability of the State Department to carry out its mission. I'm not going to labor the point. We all know about the budget and that was submitted by the Trump administration that would very seriously compromise the ability of the United States to maintain its global leadership on diplomacy. But I do mention there is in that budget the elimination of development assistance at USAID, the elimination of economic support, and putting it into a new category of development assistance and economic support, but at 40% lower funds. So as we are looking at authorization, it's important that we understand what's going on here, because it doesn't seem to add up to what we think are important issues. And lastly, let me mention the area of diversity. Diversity is a matter that is critically important for the State Department to carry out its mission. If you don't have a diversified, talented workforce, it's virtually impossible for America to have maximum impact around all parts of the world. So we want to help you on that effort. But when we look at what happened with the Pickering and the Rangel Fellows, that causes us some concern as to what is the commitment in the State Department to maintain that flow of talent in a diversified workforce. So, yes, we will deal with that in State Department authorization, but we like to work with you to make sure that we, in fact, have that type of talented workforce at the Department of State. Look forward to your testimony and look forward to our discussions.
We'll now turn to the only confirmed person other than Secretary of State to help structure the State Department. We're thankful that you're here and in the role that you're playing on behalf of our nation and all of us, and we look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cardin, and members of the committee for having me back today. We had a good discussion last week in this committee on the Department's annual TIP report, which we released last month, and we're grateful for your support and attention to this important issue and many other State Department matters. As I committed in my confirmation hearing, I am always at your disposal to come and talk about issues of mutual importance to the Department of State, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to engage with the committee both on the Draft Authorization Act and on our redesign effort. I certainly recognize and appreciate the committee's success last year in passing authorization legislation. In passing the bill, you sent a clear, unmistakable message that Congress is committed to American diplomacy and to the many patriots of the Department of State who work long hours, serve the American people, and advance our interests abroad. Thank you, members of the committee, for your commitment to the Department and for your dedication to serving our mutual goal of serving and representing the people of the United States. We look forward to working with you on this year's authorization effort and appreciate the opportunity to engage, discuss, and coordinate with you throughout this process. From my initial review of the draft FY 2018 State Department authorization bill, it's clear that the committee and the department share many of the same goals: advancing America's national security and economic interests, the judicious expenditure of resources, and the protection of our personnel and interests around the world. In the 21st century, the United States faces many evolving threats to our national security. As this committee knows well, the State Department, with a workforce of more than 75,000, must respond to these challenges with the necessary speed and appropriate resources. The nature of our work at the State Department demands flexibility and adaptability to an ever-changing world. We ask that the committee keep this in mind as you continue to evaluate proposals for the authorization bill. We also appreciate the great interest and support the committee has shown to the department's efforts to make our programs and organizations more efficient and effective. The cornerstone of this redesign effort has been the input and feedback received from the State Department's own employees. We recently completed a listening survey which is made available to every one of our State Department and USAID colleagues. The response was outstanding and well received. Over 35,000 employees completed the survey, and hundreds took part in face-to-face follow-up interviews. Now that we have that initial feedback and have posted the results of the survey, the Secretary has asked me to lead Phase 2 of the redesign efforts, which began last week. I share the Secretary's approach to making our department more efficient and effective without preconceived ideas about the final result. Phase 2 includes a steering committee that provides oversight and working groups to address the main themes that came out of the listening tour. First, foreign assistance. Second, overseas alignment and approach. Third, human capital planning. Fourth, IT platforms. And fifth, management support. We've created an online portal so that every employee can continue to provide input throughout this process. To ensure a thorough and comprehensive review, we are drawing upon the expertise of every bureau in the department with participation from Washington and posts overseas. This redesign effort is part of a larger agency review as directed by the President. To meet the President's goals, we expect our review to be completed and a report submitted by September 15th. We welcome your input as we move forward and please know that your feedback will be integral to making the Secretary's organizational redesign a success. Thank you again for the opportunity to discuss the State Department authorization. Carry out its mission to serve American interests abroad. I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. I'll defer to the ranking member and withhold my time for interjections.
Again, Secretary Sullivan, thank you so much for your willingness to take on these responsibilities. I want to talk about an area that's gotten a lot of attention in this committee, and that's special envoys. The chairman has properly pointed out that they continue to grow and grow and grow. These are not confirmed positions, and therefore they gain a lot of power at times where a confirmed person should have personal responsibility. So I don't know exactly how we're going to handle this one, because there's a lot of support within Congress for particular envoys. And we don't want to diminish the importance of the particular area in which we have a special envoy. And therefore, if we eliminate, the concern is that Congress is deterring the priority. On the other hand, I would like to know what your priorities are. Where do you think we should be looking at these special envoys? Where are you looking at not filling envoys or suggesting perhaps even new envoys? And is it important to have those positions confirmed by the United States Senate or not? So can you just share with us your thoughts on how you would like to see the Congress working, the Senate working with you on the special envoys?
Certainly. Well, I think, Senator, you've hit the nail on the head. The topic of special envoys, it really depends on the issue we're talking about, the office that we're talking about. We have, I think, approximately 70. Some of those offices were created to address serious issues which, over time, have diminished in significance or importance. Others, whether it's global women's issues, fighting anti-Semitism, are enduring issues that are of extreme importance to us, not only in the State Department, but as Americans. So it really depends on the office we're talking about. Some of the interests that will guide us are making sure that the office, if the office is to remain functioning, is that it's linked to resources at the department, for example, a bureau, that it may be isolated from if it is a special envoy who reports only to the secretary. So All of these special envoys are subject to our redesign review that is
Even those that are congressionally authorized by
Well,
Congress?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, are you considering not filling positions that Congress specifically has provided by statutory authority?
We are looking at all of them for those that, and we'll consult with you and this committee and others on each of them. Any office that you, I know Senator Shaheen and I spoke about women's issues. Any office that has continuing interest by members of this committee, we will consult with you before we take.
And I want to give the administration maximum flexibility. But where Congress has said that this area, whether it's gender issues or tolerance or the rights of minority communities, where we have specified by statute certain authority, it seems to me that we're the policy arm, that those are areas where you really don't have discretion and should be filling. And if we're going to try to work together on this, I mean, I don't know. I'm open on this because I agree with the chairman. We have too many special envoys. On the other hand, there are areas that I want to have special attention where I don't think you get it unless there's a point person within the State Department to deal with it. And I don't have that comfort level as to how we're going to resolve this.
If I could, just to put it in perspective, I think there's 68 envoys. 7 are permissive. In other words, we legislated permissive language to create an envoy. 11 are mandated. So the vast majority of these are just made up. And in many cases, there are large staffs that go with that. Is that correct?
That's true.
So anyway, just...
What is permissive? I didn't know. Just
Should instead of shall.
well,
or may.
May.
May instead of shall. It's just like we do sometimes on sanctions, may instead of shall. So there's really only 11 that are mandated.
I may challenge whether may and shall. We've gone through this debate many times, whether it's directive or whether it's mandatory. I'm not comfortable, and I would like to know how we are going to, how the United States Senate is going to be able to weigh in. If we're the authorizing committee, if the Congress is the authorizing body, and we want to pay special attention, and we think the best way is by special envoy, do we have to pass a statute to do that? Or are we looking at ways that we have input? So if you follow the traditions of other administrations, yes, we tell you 8, and then you get 70 on your own? I'm not sure that's the right way to go. On the other hand, should we require that the Senate sign off on every one of them by advice and consent? We could do that. We're already backlogged on your filling positions. That will just add another, I don't know, 20, 30 more confirmations that have to get through. I just think this is a cumbersome process, and it's tough for us to figure out how to do it unless we know that there is an open process that, I mean, I think there's tremendous interest on women's issues. You say that's one, but there are other areas that members have pretty strong views. And I know in the United States Senate, one senator sometimes can dictate what happens around here. So if a senator gets difficult, are we then going to have a special envoy? Mr. Chairman, I just think we have to have some orderly process in which we're going to be dealing with these special envoys.
And my sense is that Secretary Sullivan agrees with that and is more than glad to have a conversation about that.
Mr. Chair, I have a procedural question.
Yes, sir.
Since there is a vote at 5:30, how does the chair intend to proceed with the hearing?
We are going to adjourn at 5:30, and we're going to come back at 5:45.
Thank you.
Any other procedural questions? Senator Young.
Chairman, I have some if you want some.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. So just on the issue of special envoys, this is precisely why we need to look at the entire organization so that we're not doing an end run around our regional bureaus, our functional bureaus, and so forth. But it would be helpful, I agree, with folks on both sides of the aisle, that we need to, at least over a period of time, establish some operating principles and inform us when a special envoy will be appointed, when one won't. One possibility is that we are notified, and that special envoy will continue to exist unless we affirmatively indicate after 60 days or whatever that special envoy was inappropriately, from our perspective, put in place. I'd like to pivot to the proposed merger, at least circulating in some circles, the contemplated merger of USAID and the State Department. CSIS recently published some, what I thought was really instructive and thoughtful analysis of the merger of USIA, United States Information Agency, and the State Department in 1999, and why that went awry. And I'd like to just read some excerpts from that. The origins of that merger, I became aware, were Vice President Al Gore's Reinventing Government blueprint. The plan was to fold USAID and USIA and the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency into state. Now, ACDA, the Arms Control Agency, was happy to merge because they are primarily diplomatic in what they do. But USAID and USIA resisted that. A deal was cut, as so often happens up here, and so here's what happened. And oh, by the way, the Heritage Foundation, which is currently advocating for a consolidation of state and USAID, has called this USIA merger misguided, and some of their scholars have written about how poorly it went. So one reason for the failed integration of the agencies stemmed from the vastly different missions and cultures of the two organizations. I would argue that this is something we should consider here. State and USIA's budget functions were also merged, but public diplomacy was and is seen as a secondary or tertiary function of the State Department. That created problems as well. And lastly, the consolidation, we now know, was short-sighted. Soon thereafter, we had 9/11. The global war on terror is a global war of ideas. It gives us some sense of how consequential getting it wrong can be. So I would just commend that very brief article to your attention, to others' attention as we consider that. Next, I want to thank you. You caught me out in the hall. You have the best follow-up of any political appointee in my recent memory. You caught me out in the hall after our last hearing and asked me if I had any additional questions or concerns pertaining to a General Accountability Office question I asked you. And then we got into a conversation about a task force that Senator Shaheen and I had been working on related to USAID and its reorganization. I indicated to you that Secretary Tillerson had promised to sit down with members of that task force, Senator Shaheen and myself, to discuss some of our ideas, and you offered your encouragement, so thank you for that. Lastly, I think it's important for this committee to understand, Secretary Sullivan, the timeline we're dealing with here. And in your prepared statement, you write that you expect to complete the reorganization report by September 15. I don't believe you've spoken to this yet, but will this committee receive a copy of that report, and if so, when?
Thank you, Senator. Not only will you receive the final work product, but my plan is that we will be consulting regularly. I and others, including the Secretary, will be consulting regularly between now and then so that your views inform the final report.
So when would you anticipate the next, because I haven't been apprised of any previous consultations to my recollection. So is that something you could send to each office here, each member of the committee, your updates?
Certainly, I'd be delighted to. I started last week, as the chairman mentioned, I had a conversation before the hearing last week with the chairman and the ranking member on this, and I told them then, and I will tell all the members of the committee now, that is just a first step in our consultation with you. This is the next step, and we will make sure that you and all the members of the committee are aware going forward of opportunities for us to solicit your input and also to provide you updates on how we're proceeding.
And lastly, can you assure me that you won't begin implementation of this proposed plan until each member of the committee has been fully briefed on it, sir?
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Corker, Ranking Member Cardin, for holding this important hearing and for all the work that you and your staff have done on this FY 2018 state authorization bill. I continue to believe it is very important for this committee to go through this process annually, and I appreciate the improvements to the process this year. I'm pleased the bill includes 3 of my proposals to help State Department personnel, and I hope we can agree to provide greater flexibility to allow separated family members of Foreign Service officers to travel to see each other and family members, and I look forward to authorizing science and technology fellowships to encourage innovation at the department. While I support this committee process, I also want to be clear that I do not view this bill as somehow granting congressional approval of the Trump administration's reorganization or funding plans for the department and USAID. And I appreciate the line of questioning by Senator Young to that effect. I continue to be concerned about the lack of clarity surrounding the reorganization process and hiring freeze. Appreciate what we've heard so far today, but look for more. And of course, I think I oppose the steep budget cuts to diplomacy and development proposed in the administration's FY18 budget request. I am pleased that this bill includes a mechanism by which Congress can review reorganization, and I wanted to move forward. So, Deputy Secretary Sullivan, thank you for your willingness to testify and to respond to our concerns. Foreign Service officers, their families, and the whole community of employees of the State Department and USAID make enormous sacrifices to serve our country. Their work is critical to our national security and to advancing U.S. interests around the globe. As a member of the Senate's Friends of the Foreign Service Caucus, I believe we can and should do more to recognize their work and address the challenges they face, and I look forward to taking that on with you. Let me just mention, in April, I traveled with Chairman Corker to the Bidi refugee camp in northern Uganda to draw attention to the impacts of conflict and man-made famine in South Sudan. I then went on to Juba, had an opportunity to spend time with the Foreign Service officers at Embassy Juba, which is an unaccompanied post. I'm concerned that they face unnecessary hardships, and I'd be interested, Mr. Deputy Secretary, in whether you are working to improve the conditions, of course, at Embassy Juba, but also at many other unaccompanied posts around the world. And I'm interested in whether you would consider renewing or extending the South Sudan envoy position, one of the 70-some that I see some value in given the famine, the conflict, and the regional context.
Sure. Well, the welfare of our men and women who serve abroad, both Foreign Service and Civil Service, is our highest priority. The Secretary, every staff meeting we have begins with a question, and that is, are our people okay abroad? It's his highest priority. It's my highest priority. To address the issues that you've raised, we have included in our redesign effort both the redesign consists of an executive steering committee of which I chair, and then the 5 working groups that I described. Among them, the working groups would address all of the issues you raised about conditions abroad, allowances, the treatment of our Foreign Service officers, the support that we provide to them. The most significant aspect of this redesign is all of the input is coming from our career Foreign Service and Civil Service officers. All of the working groups, there are very few non-career participants. In fact, for the working groups, there's only 1 non-career participant. All the other members are either from state or from AID, with proportional representation between state and AID, Foreign Service, Civil Service, stationed in Washington or abroad, and at different levels of seniority. So we've tried to cover the whole gamut of the department and AID so that those issues you raised will be raised by the people who are most affected by them.
Let me ask, if I might, 2 more quick questions. I understand you may not have the full time to answer them. I'll submit them for the record if that's the case, because we're going to adjourn in just a moment. First, I understand one of the bureaus or offices you're considering closing is the Office of Iran Nuclear Implementation and folding it into the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs. Ambassador Stephen Mull, someone who this committee got to know well, is no longer serving as the lead coordinator for Iran nuclear implementation. I would welcome hearing if I need information on JCPOA enforcement. Who's the lead person? Will the administration appoint a new lead coordinator for Iran nuclear implementation? And are you accounting for the fact that this committee and individual senators like having regular briefings on Iran, the JCPOA, and the path forward? First. Second, I'll just summarize. In a lot of meetings with civil service and foreign service officers in a number of posts in the last 6 months, there's a lot of concern about USAID, both from its own employees and from others in the department, about proposals that would reduce its autonomy. The budget proposal imposes particularly sharp cuts on USAID, and I didn't know whether proposals to merge USAID into state were part of what is being reviewed under your leadership, and how you would work to address USAID employees' concerns.
Certainly.
I have
Briefly.
exceeded my time.
I'll take the second issue first.
Thank you.
Let me reassure you and the committee that there has been no predetermination on the issue of absorbing USAID into the State Department. We had a robust discussion last week in the steering committee with a significant representation from USAID participating, who provide their input on what Senator Gardner has described as the different culture, mission, tool sets, et cetera, that USAID employees have. I'm very familiar with that and very respectful of that, and their input is extremely important. And there has been no decision to merge AID into state. Second, Ambassador Mull I've met with. He's one of our most senior career ambassadors, a great patriot. We are, the office that you described is one of those that it's under review. No decision has been made yet on what will be done, if anything will be changed with respect to that office. But what I can assure you of is two things. First, that the significance of the subject that's addressed by that office is not diminished in any way. And second, whatever information you, Senator Coons, or any member of this committee needs, you will get. And that's my promise to you.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence.
Thank you. So we'll stand in recess for 15 minutes. We'll reconvene by my watch at 5:49. You're welcome to some of our great coffee back here or sitting there talking to others, but thank you.
Encouraging you to go. If it becomes a bigger problem, we can write a letter. Like letters, the department will respond to letters before.
I just don't know where they're getting the information. I just don't know where they're going to find anything, but figuring it I don't know. I mean, like, the recent things that
I already wrote. So what do you say? So I had a house where the meeting was made to work, and then my wife's friend coincidentally so like that's as far as I'm concerned, it's still happening. But
yeah, I wouldn't say no to that.
like that happens. I don't
Doing the rants for a wedding, and it's just happening.
I asked Chris to my first second round. He was like, yeah, stuff it is.
He got in I love those so much. I love it. I love a 5 p.m. hearing. I love students. I love everything.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, it's just really
I just passed 4 years.
I was going to say I had lobbies, and that she left like every paper that she ever got from meetings in our desk, and I found something from like 2 years ago that was
The guy who proceeded, so I started as a staff assistant. The guy who was in his job. So I was able to see
Are you from New York?
yeah, I grew up in Are you from California?
Yeah. Hired staff assistants who are either from Delaware or like went to University of Delaware.
We're very similar. Really appreciate it.
Oh, did you really? But I think I went to like the wrong part of the city. I went to Manchester. But then we went to.
Was it a vacation or was it?
No, I have like friends back. I graduated in 2014, and it was in like 5 years. So 2 of my friends just like right to me. And been there ever since. One of them,
the no accountability part.
but the other one didn't work.
Got an LCD for Shannon t-shirt.
Yeah. but we went to.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's where
We don't have any problems with refugees.
yeah, Manchester volunteers in Manchester is the biggest city in It's actually it's developed. So
The White House.
like from when the time when I was growing up, it's developed. So there are definitely more important people before it was just like no.
I mean, I had a good time there. I went to this weird bar. But it was
Like most kids were living in it's easier, but it's also like big into Boston.
yeah, we spent the other day in Boston, so I need to get back up there. That's really fun. Yeah, we were in Boston, and then we went to like a demi-sort but I still feel like I don't have a big deal about it. Like everybody knows what
Really?
yeah.
Because I often but all my friends who weren't in school, so it sucks.
Oh, really?
No good bars. So it like Boston, so there's literally no bars around. Not a lot of people run. Boozy. Yeah, I'm sure that unless you're in college.
I didn't even know I was like, there's reasons to be here. He was like, I'm not fine.
It's not. But it's good to hear that you're.
Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful and like so many
Yeah, I don't mind. And I actually kind of seasons than here was kind of shitty for a couple months. And
that's valid.
I miss that.
Yeah. My dad
Just a lot of time in Vermont, but it's pretty.
very clear delineation.
Yeah, right.
As far as I can tell, it was like
Oh, really? I feel like that's actually pretty surprising. It's like, it's a fucking place.
But you still want to end up doing that?
I don't know. I love DC. But it doesn't. I was actually I was sure you as well. A bunch of friends like to say and I always, because like New York is close, so I always like when I visit. And I can't decide. Like,
I really like to like New York. I love to go for like 3 days, and then I'm like, all right, I'm not really enough. But I will say like my friends who like be there for a long time, like with graduation, they have like good spots, like most of them have like a little outside living, and they have like a good routine. And there's always something new.
no, it's definitely good. It's kind of like, it's just like, I mean, I sometimes
Exactly.
So I actually, I'm not big on Facebook. I mean, this thing is great.
Recess will end, and we'll stand in hearing again, and I'll move to Senator Portman. Thank you for being here, sir.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Secretary Sullivan, you know how I feel about you. I appreciate the proactive approach you took on getting Otto Warmbier home, and appreciate your coming to Cincinnati for his service as well, his funeral. I was not here earlier. I know the hiring freeze and the reorganization was a topic of discussion, and I just wanted to talk to you a little about that as it relates to the Global Engagement Center. As you know, it's something that I feel strongly about, and we, in 2017, as a Senate and a House in the National Defense Authorization Act, asked the Global Engagement Center to take on additional responsibilities, specifically with regard to disinformation coming from countries intended to destabilize democracies, undermine some of our basic values and institutions. Russia and China come to mind. GEC also has an important role, as you know, in providing the counter-narrative and pushing back against Islamic extremism. So my question for you is there an ability to keep some of these important entities, like the Global Engagement Center specifically, from being weakened by a hiring freeze or other reorganizations that could lead to it having a more difficult time carrying out its important responsibilities?
Certainly, thank you, Senator, and thank you for your help also with the Warmbier case. We appreciate the assistance that you provided. With respect to the Global Engagement Center, it is a priority for Secretary Tillerson. It's something that's an important part of our mission for all the reasons you state. We are flexible in, there is a hiring freeze, but we are flexible with respect to that. We have granted a number of exceptions, over 700 exceptions to the hiring freeze to support safety, security, health. So we are reviewing them regularly, and I'm not aware that there has been, as of yet, a request with respect to the GEC, but we would certainly entertain that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think that the threats we talked about do present a national security threat to the United States of America, and certainly that would qualify, it seems to me. And again, we're just getting this up and going. It's more important than ever, given what we know about now some of the meddling here in our own election, but also some fledgling democracies around the world are being affected by some of this foreign disinformation and propaganda. So I would hope that they would ask for and be exempted from these hiring restrictions to the extent you're continuing to develop that important entity. So I thank you for that. If you don't mind, what I'd like you to do is get back to me on it.
Of course.
And we will be interested to see why they have not made a request, if they have not. On the reorganization in general, again, I know you've had an opportunity to speak about this some. The many entities that you now have oversight over in your role as deputy, and I understand you're going to be heading up some of the reorganization ideas, is the foreign military financing. And I think FMF is a critical component of American diplomacy and relationship building in very key parts of the world. In the State Department budget request, that account was to be reduced, I think, by 19% compared to 2017. with 95% of the requests allocated to just 4 countries, Israel, Egypt, Jordan, Pakistan. I think the remaining 200 million was to be placed in a global account. And I guess I just wonder, does this budget proposal reflect broader structural changes in the reorganization? In other words, is this something that the State Department is considering as part of its reorganization? And what do you perceive as the benefits of such changes compared to the current FMF structure?
Well, the redesign that we're undertaking is really independent of the budgeting process. Secretary Tillerson has made clear that even if our budget were being increased, even if we were the Defense Department and we were getting more money from the budget, that he would undertake a redesign to look at the mission of the department and how we're organized. One of the work streams, one of the work groups that's been constituted for the redesign focuses on foreign assistance programs, and included in that is FMF. So we are considering reviewing that as part of our redesign effort with input from Foreign Service, Civil Service, senior level career people to make recommendations on improving our foreign assistance programs, including FMF.
On FMF, are you looking at loans instead of grants?
I'm sorry?
Are you looking at loans instead of grants?
We're looking at both.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, my time has expired. I want to thank you for your help most recently on the Warmbier case, and then generally, I wish you good luck on the reorganization. I do think that there's room for reform, and I do think there are ways to more effectively be able to represent our interests, soft power interests around the world, and I'm glad you are where you are. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope this is the first of many conversations we will have about the State Department authorization bill. I have serious reservations about the bill as written for a number of reasons, and I just want to outline a few of those. It's my personal belief that Congress as a whole is a co-equal branch of government with the executive and must therefore dutifully exercise its role not only as overseer, but as authorizer. What do you authorize? While I appreciate the efforts of the chair to include many of the provisions Senator Rubio and I worked on together for the bureaus that fall within our subcommittee's jurisdiction, the bill merely offers permissive suggestions for the Secretary. Saying there should be a bureau within the department that is authorized to promote democracy and actively support human rights throughout the world is very different from mandating that bureau's existence. And I worry, particularly given this administration's intentions, for example, to completely cut funding for democracy assistance, such permissive language would give the Secretary congressional cover for simply not supporting such a bureau. So in my view, true oversight is in essence to create the structure at the State Department, to authorize it. That's the Congress's view. Additionally, this bill does not address a critical component of our foreign policy, foreign assistance, and USAID and foreign assistance programs that promote economic development, support good governance reforms, provide technical and educational training are essential elements of a comprehensive American foreign policy that promotes our interests and builds more stable and resilient allies and partners. To suggest, as I've heard, the possibility of folding USAID into state, to me, is alarming. And I'd like to understand the policy perspective behind that. And I'm especially concerned that we're undertaking this exercise as the administration pursues what continues to be, at least to me, draconian cuts. And even though we supposedly reject it here, it says where the administration's intent is. Draconian cuts to the agency primarily responsible for promoting American values and securing our interests overseas, and an ill-defined reorganization process that thus far seems to be no more than an exercise undermining and pushing out career diplomats in the foreign and civil service who have dedicated their lives to serving this country, with seemingly no strategic consideration that I can discern. Mr. Sullivan, public reports of the listening survey you reference in your testimony indicate, quote, a high level of confusion and demoralization among the ranks of career diplomats and civil servants who express concerns about their futures as well as the trajectory of American foreign policy. You've explained these measures as saving money, and I ask, at what cost? The conservative National Review recently published a piece that concluded, quote, the State Department's core is being gutted. Tillerson is running Foggy Bottom the way a corporate raider might take over a company, firing half of its workforce, repurposing its original mission, scaling back its operations across the globe. Offices are being shuttered, while ambassadorial, assistant secretary, and undersecretary posts remain unfilled. So since this is the beginning of this debate, I assume, I just wanted to take most of my time to say that. But let me ask you, in what time I have left, one or two strategic questions. Can you share with me whether, during your nomination hearing before this committee in May, which I supported you noted the cultural and policy differences between USAID and state, including the long-term nature of development and often shorter focus of diplomacy. Can you give me a sense of whether it is true that proposals to merge USAID into the State Department is in fact taking place, or to reduce the agency's autonomy, and if so, how do you intend to incorporate this perspective you said under oath here in terms of going through the conversations on reorganization?
Well, the first thing I'd say, Senator, thank you, is that we are including both at the on our steering committee, which is the broad organizing committee that I chair, and on all of the 5 working groups, including the foreign assistance working groups, senior and less senior career AID officials who career people first predominate on every one of these working groups and the steering committee, and there is proportional representation, so AID is well represented. The AID perspective, which you just articulated, with which I agreed during my confirmation hearing and still agree.
How many people in the working group?
There are approximately 50.
And how many people from AID?
I don't have. I'll get to that number, but it's a breakdown based on the size of the State Department versus AID. But I will get you those precise numbers. But AID, we believe, is completely, its view is articulated by senior people who are represented fairly on all of these committees.
Well, my time has expired. You told me that they're represented. That wasn't my question. My question was, is it part of the policy reorganization intention to fold AID into state? And if so, how are you dealing with the differences in culture?
My apologies, Senator. The answer to that question is no. There is no intention to fold AID into state. That has been proposed by people outside the department. It is something that could be considered by this working group. But if it were, it would be with the full input of all of these AID leaders involved. But I can commit to you that there has not been an intention, there is not an intention of this department to absorb USAID.
If I could, as I understand, just in talking with you, but also Secretary Tillerson, there's no beginning point of making any assumption whatsoever either way, as I understand it, and y'all are taking input, but you're not beginning this process with the intention of trying to make that happen. You're beginning the process by meeting with others and trying to understand the best way to go forward. Is that correct?
And in going forward, it will be done in, as Senator Menendez has recommended, and we agree, in close consultation with this committee.
Mr. Chairman, I remember the refrain that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so, I get what the Secretary is saying, but I have serious concern when people are told, fill out forms and do memos that basically talk about how your service would be moved into another direction. Maybe that's not the intention. Maybe it's informative at the end of the day, but I'm not quite sure. I have many other questions. I'll submit them for the record. I hope this is the beginning of a conversation.
Very good. And I'm not trying to lead. I just don't want his response to be misunderstood based on what I know to be some other context. And also, I don't think that there's an intent to move it in any particular direction. I think that's fair at this point, and I think it's also fair that you want input and others want input before a decision like that is made. Senator Shaheen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to you and Senator Cardin for holding this hearing, which I think is very important. because, as so many of my colleagues have said, it's critical that Congress play a role, an oversight role in this reorganization effort. And our engagement as a committee when we were in the process of a state reauthorization process, I think is particularly important. And I have some reservations that I've shared with the committee chairman about moving forward with this kind of a reorganization at the department, while we're also doing a reauthorization and we have no idea what is going to come out of the reorganization that you're doing at the department and what your recommendations will be. So I have some specific questions, but before I get to those, I just want to raise a topic that I know this committee has been concerned about. I know it was raised last week, I think with you actually, and that is the reports of Undersecretary Shannon's meeting with the Russian Deputy Minister Ryabkov today. We've had experts. I raised this last week before the Armed Services Committee when we were talking about Russia's influence in the Montenegro election and their coup attempt, basically, about what kind of a message it would send if we return those facilities that were seized in response to the attack on our elections. And the witnesses before the Armed Services Committee were unanimous in saying that is absolutely the wrong message for us to be sending. So I just want to raise this again because I think it's a very big issue, and I hope you will keep the committee informed about any updates on these talks and what happens with this issue.
Certainly, Senator Shaheen. I've had this conversation with Senator Cardin last week.
That's my understanding.
Those properties to which you refer are part of a larger dialogue with the Russian Federation involving issues, for example, the PNG issue, the Russian diplomats who were expelled. There are a whole host of issues that we're discussing with the Russian Federation. I understand there is a meeting going on as we speak, but my undertaking commitment to Senator Cardin and I make to you is that we will consult with you on this issue before any final implementation of an agreement that we don't have yet with the Russian Federation.
Well, I appreciate that. Again, I don't think we should be rewarding Russia until we see their behavior change. So I want to go on to a couple of issues relative to the reorganization. You mentioned the conversation we had at your confirmation hearing about the Office of Global Women's Issues, which I understand is that our draft state authorization text still removes the ambassador at large for that position. I think it's hard to think about setting up an Office for Global Women's Issues without having somebody in charge of that who has significant authority. So can you talk about what you're doing with respect to that issue as you're looking at the reorganization?
Certainly, it's a high priority for the Secretary as he's testified and as I've testified, and it's a high priority for the White House and both for the President and senior advisors to the President. So the office itself, as is the case with all of the special envoys that we've been discussing, is included in, because it's a look at the entire department, it's included in what we are assessing. What I can commit to you is, well, I can commit several things. First, that issue will not, the significance of that issue of empowering women will not be downgraded no matter what happens to the office. Second, we will consult with you before any action is taken. And third, that we are committed at the department to empowering women at the department. And those three things I am confident of and commit to you.
Well, thank you. I very much appreciate that. One of the other reports that's come out in the last week has been that the White House is pushing for the State Department bureaus of consular affairs and the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration to be transferred to the Department of Homeland Security. Can you speak to whether that is under consideration?
It's similar to my response to Senator Menendez. That is not the intent of the department. Secretary Tillerson does not have at present that intention. It is something that if it were raised in our review, we would consider, but it would be considered with the understanding that both the consular affairs function and the function of PRM are vitally important to our mission at the Department of State, as I discussed last week at the hearing on Thursday.
Well, thank you. I, again, appreciate that. Consular Affairs, as you know, has been charged with setting visa policy since 1952 when we passed the Immigration and Nationality Act, and I think to shift that to the Department of Homeland Security, especially at a time when the issue of refugees and immigration is so controversial, would be the absolutely wrong approach. And I will just tell you right now that if that's the case, I will be one of those opponents leading the charge. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just, again, I want to revisit the subject that Senator Menendez brought up, and then I would like to visit something Senator Shaheen has just brought up. I get no sense whatsoever that it is the intention of the Secretary of State to push for USAID to be merged into state. I get none of that. I don't think that's an outcome they're driving at. I do think, on the other hand, they are sitting down and talking with people, as you might expect, and getting input as to how the organization ought to be set up. But I don't think there's any desire whatsoever for that predetermined outcome to occur. Okay, I don't. I know you have some concerns about the piece of legislation, and we all know that any one senator at this juncture can keep it from happening. What I don't understand is, I know we've talked about it some on the floor, I don't understand why waiting to do an authorization till after the State Department has acted. I don't see how that benefits anybody. I just don't understand that. I mean, we're continuing to build out a State Department authorization each year. We make it larger and larger and larger, and at some point we're going to have the whole thing done. I don't understand how, because they're going through a reorg, us not taking action benefits us. I mean, I know we've talked about that, and again, any one person can keep it from happening. We got it. I just don't understand how that retains authority to the Senate. So we're having an open discussion. Maybe this is improper, but I just wanted to raise that. Sure.
So as I understand the reauthorization that we're looking at, we don't deal with USAID in that reauthorization. Is that correct?
Which is how we set up the process on the front end in order to, again, accomplish as much as we thought we could under a unanimous consent type Senate. But go ahead.
Well, I guess it feels to me like if there were a reorganization that makes a recommendation for USAID or the Bureau of Consular Affairs or Global Women's Issues, whatever it is, that when that goes into effect, if we've already done our reauthorization, we don't really have a vehicle that we can help to move to raise Congress's concerns about those reorganization policies that we might disagree with. And that's the concern that I have.
Except that we have the authorization again next year.
We do, but
by withholding, we in no way are keeping a vehicle to do it. You understand? I mean,
I do, but I also understand that when something goes into effect, it's harder to undo it than to prevent it from happening.
But we don't have a vehicle at present. I mean, again, I'm just missing the psychology here, and I want to understand it because I'd like for us to continue as a committee to build out to a place where we actually have an NDAA type authorization process. Each year it's getting broader and broader and broader. I just don't understand how withholding has any effect whatsoever on the reorg when they're telling us they're going to come back and consult with us anyway in that process all the way through. But it's a conversation we need to continue to have.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just briefly intercede. I want to get an authorization bill done this year, so I'm with you on that. But I think it is a reality that we have to look at what's being done in the administration. Let me just give you one example. Tonight, there was a press report that the Secretary of State's considering the elimination of the Special Coordinator for Global Criminal Justice Issues, which basically deal with atrocities and war crimes. There's great interest in this committee on both sides of the aisle for Syrian war crimes accountability, Iraq war crimes accountability, preventing atrocities, etc. And although I understand the Secretary wants to reorganize, it's being broadcast as downplaying the importance of holding war criminals accountable. In that environment, it's going to be difficult for us not to respond. So I think Senator Shaheen's point, dealing with USAID, yes, we've agreed that this framework would not include USAID, but if the administration is taking fundamental changes, and I understand Secretary Sullivan believes that's not the case, but if they were taking fundamental changes on the organization of USAID and we remain silent, that is a challenge. And if they're going to do major changes in criminal war crimes accountability and we're silent, that's a non-starter for, I think, both Democrats and Republicans on this committee. So I just think it's a reality. We're going to have to respond to some of the things that are done. But I want to get to the finish line.
Yeah. And each year, there's an authorization that comes up, and each year, you can write things in and make them law. And I don't see how remaining silent by not acting in any way causes us to be any lesser remaining silent. But so again, I don't get the psychology, but I obviously need to understand it for us to be able to move ahead. Senator Menendez, and then we'll move to Senator Markey.
Mr. Chairman, thanks for the opportunity. I understand your question. Let me just give you a few cuts at it.
Okay.
As you may remember, I didn't even want to move forward on the state authorization.
I remember it very well.
And out of deference to the chair, I yielded and stopped my objection on the floor.
And I appreciate that.
And we have worked together on many things, so this is not an ideological issue, but it is, for me, one of the most critical things the committee can do, and how it does it is incredibly important. So, for example, in answer to your question, how does waiting inure to our benefit? If we were actually having legislation that was in creating certain parts of the State Department in a mandatory form versus a permissive form, I would say it does not inure to our benefit to wait. But when we basically create permissive virtually across the board, the second complicating factor, in addition to it, I don't believe it should be permissive across the board, is that the reorganization taking place by the Secretary, such a permissive nature might be seen as giving it an okay, that what you ended up doing is actually okay. And for some of us, I think some of the things, whether intended or not, and I accept your word since you are engaged far more with the Secretary of the State Department than I have, that the intentions are good. But for example, I know that OMB Director Mulvaney, he has a different view than the Secretary. Mm-hmm. And so he may be pushing that view from an administration point of view. So it may not even be the Secretary at the end of the day to collapse USAID into state. The point being that when we give it our imprimatur, in a sense, I don't want to be responsible for giving imprimaturs to things that I really fundamentally have a problem with. And the last point is, the question of it'll be far more difficult, in my view, having sat where you've sat and having an administration of my party and standing up to it when I personally believe they were wrong on a policy basis, to challenge in next year's authorization, assuming you do this year's authorization, something that the administration will have done. So they structure the new department as they wish. They pursue their reorganization without any meaningful effort legislatively to construct what that should look like. And now, once having done that, members, not only on this committee but on the Senate as a whole, will be put into a position of, if they believe that that reorganization or elements thereof were not appropriate, of challenging the administration to do that in a new authorization bill. So That may not be a problem for the chair, because I recognize the chair's independence, but I have to be honest with you, I'm not sure that that's everybody's case. So those are my, when you ask me why wait,
Yeah.
well, that's my perspective.
I'm glad to have this conversation. We're going to move to you in 1 second, Senator Markey. I would just say we're in that situation either way. You know, if we act in the next 60 days or we don't act in the next 60 days, we're in that same situation, but we haven't built it out further. I understand what you're saying about permissive versus mandatory. That's a point well taken. But by not acting or acting, we find ourselves in the same place when the timing of what they do is going to occur later on. But go ahead, Senator.
I just wanted to make one point to clarify that I support the reauthorization. In fact, I think this committee should have the same kind of process that the Armed Services Committee has, where we do an authorization every year. It's debated. It goes to the floor, and there's an understanding that it's going to be part of what we do annually, because I think what we need to do is to elevate the role of diplomacy and the State Department. Right. And having that kind of a process does that. So I'm totally in agreement with you on that, and we're just disagreeing about timing.
Yeah, that's fine. And I'll move to Senator Markey by saying each year there seems to always come an issue, and I really appreciate both of you, actually. I think last year on the floor, the two of you were actually somewhat resistant for different reasons. I appreciate you building out and allowing us to continue to build out, and I've shared with each of you and Senator Cardin, I don't come at this with any ideology. I come at this with what you just said exactly. I want this committee to determine the policies that take place at State Department and USAID. And it's more important for me each year that we build that out, whatever direction it takes, just so we continue to build it out. And I thank you both for allowing last year to go forward. I don't know how stopping it this year benefits us, but I'm still listening. Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's like you're going to be in an echo chamber here, so I will just say that if there is going to be an effort by this administration to eliminate special envoys, and this legislation makes it possible for them to eliminate special envoys, we're talking about the special representative for nuclear nonproliferation, the special representative for biological and toxin weapons convention issues, the representative to the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the special negotiator for plutonium disposition, the special envoy for climate change, the Office of the Haiti Special Coordinator, the Special Representative for International Labor Affairs, the Special Envoy for Human Rights of LGBT persons, the Coordinator for Sanctions Policy, the Special Representative for Religion and Global Affairs, and the Representative for Northern Ireland issues. And so I am very concerned that language in this state authorization bill will have the effect of cutting all of these positions unless the administration chooses to fill them. And I think it would be better for us to kind of know what their plan is so that we can then respond to their proposal rather than giving them this authorization to do so without having an idea as to how many of these positions might be eliminated, if not all of them. So can I ask you, Mr. Sullivan, how many of these positions are you contemplating right now eliminating?
Senator Markey, there is no preconceived view on any of those offices. The goal is to, for all of those issues and all of the issues that are represented or addressed by those offices, all are important. Our overriding goal is to make sure that those issues are addressed properly. One concern we have with the special envoys, speaking generally, is that they are delinked from the substantive bureau. So, for example, for the Northern Ireland representative, it's not part of the European Bureau. So it wouldn't be a case, I don't think, without prejudging, but just as an example, for that special envoy, rather than being a special envoy outside of the organizational bureau who reports directly to the to the secretary, and therefore is somewhat insulated from this committee because the Assistant Secretary for European Affairs, who can be called before this committee, that special envoy reports to the secretary. It's really a question of how we address those important issues and structure our bureaucracy accordingly.
Right, but as you know, my mother's a Sullivan, Mr. Sullivan, so, it took a long time to get a special envoy to Northern Ireland, right? So that's a special thing, but each one of these other special envoys kind of reflects a priority that was established to ensure that a little special attention that otherwise the issue might not receive from the department in general was given that special, role. So none of these are incidental. Each one of these areas has, a reason why they have a special envoy. And if they're moved, into kind of larger parts of the agency that don't have any squarely aligned responsibility with a senior person inside of the department, it just would run the risk of slipping through the cracks, of not getting the attention it needed, or not having the focus, which clearly we have tried over the years to ensure that each one of these areas receives. So I just say that to you, Mr. Sullivan, that's a concern that I have, and I think others have as well. And Northern Ireland's a good example, right? Where maybe now people say, well, who cares? But, it's moved on to a more mature, area. But in the area of Brexit, there's likely to be an exacerbation of tensions that we haven't seen in a long, long time. And to be honest, the formation of the government, the new government in Great Britain, is dependent upon this alliance with a Northern Ireland party that may or may not square up with kind of the objectives which the United States has been trying to advance over the years. So I just point that out to you, and I would hope that we might, be able to get the sequencing correct. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Senator Udall.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and thank you, Deputy Secretary Sullivan, for joining us today. Just past week, we learned that the State Department spent approximately $15,000 at a Trump hotel in Vancouver when the president's daughter, Ivanka, stayed there. The Washington Post obtained this information via the Freedom of Information Act. This use of taxpayer dollars at the Trump Hotel empire reminded me of the many questions in an unanswered letter that I sent to the State Department along with several other senators. I'm hoping you can help us answer these questions. There are properties all over the world with the Trump name prominently displayed on them, many in areas that have been targeted by terrorist attacks. On March the 8th, I wrote to Secretary Tillerson along with Senators Whitehouse and Blumenthal asking what, if any, taxpayer resources are being spent to secure Trump Organization commercial real estate around the globe. First, will the State Department respond to this letter soon? It has already been 4 months since we sent the letter.
Yes, Senator, you have my apology that we haven't responded already. It's important for us to be responsive to maintain the trust and confidence of this committee.
Yeah, and so do you have any timeline on how soon you can respond to this?
I've heard of it. My apologies. I will, when I return this evening, make sure that it is acted on soonest.
Good, and I know you discussed with me on several occasions how important you thought it was for you to give us information because we have a crucial role to play under the Constitution. Has anyone in the Trump Organization or Trump administration requested assistance from state to help secure a Trump Organization property?
Not to my knowledge, and I can, with respect to the, I've seen the press reports on the hotel in Vancouver. I asked about it, and my understanding is that that the State Department, as we frequently do, assists other agencies where we have a consulate in making hotel bookings, and that my understanding is that the bookings that you refer to were for the Secret Service. They weren't for the State Department. We just happened, because we have a consulate there, we didn't seek out that booking, or they weren't our people who were staying there, so it was for another government agency.
Yeah, but so you don't know whether or not anybody in the Trump Organization or administration requested assistance from state to help secure a Trump administration property. But you'll look into that and get us an answer.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, and I'm sure you understand the thrust of these questions. I mean, when I serve on a number of committees, one in addition to this is appropriations, and I really believe that taxpayers are entitled to know how their money's being spent, and then it's a judgment call for them, really more than anything. Has the State Department, the Department of State, rented property or purchased additional goods or services from the Trump Organization to facilitate State Department missions?
Not to my knowledge, but I will undertake to get a response to that, definitive response to your question promptly, Senator.
Okay. And if so, is there an agreement in place for the Trump Organization to reimburse the federal government for those costs? I assume you will also get us an answer to that.
Yes, Senator.
There are further questions in the letter, but I would like a full written response to these and other questions. And since the administration has not responded to our letter, I will submit all of these questions for the record and hope that you give us a prompt response.
You have my word on it, Senator.
A number of recent reports have highlighted a significant morale problem at the State Department, as well as many of the concerns regarding the steep budget cuts being proposed at State. And the top leadership at State is reportedly very isolated from the nation's diplomats. Do you believe that career foreign service and civil service officers serve an important role in our nation's diplomacy?
Unquestionably.
And will you increase efforts to integrate the new political leadership of the department with career staff to best represent America's interests abroad?
I will, and I have. I spoke at the Foreign Service Institute a couple of weeks ago to 700 Foreign Service officers, and I had prepared remarks, and I put them aside, and I picked up a microphone, and I said, open it up for questions, and said, hit me with your best shot, whatever you've got, and because they are those men and women are the backbone of the department, and I have, and the Secretary has, an enormous amount of respect for them and their views.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. In my travels around the world, meeting the people that are living in the countries and there as professionals and career people are so dedicated to this country and making sure our country gets it right in terms of the country they're serving in and getting our foreign policy right. And I want to thank you for your talk with them and taking this approach. Mr. Chairman, I want to stress that any state authorization approved by Congress should include significant oversight language to ensure that the Congress has a final say about any proposed reorganization of the State Department.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Senator Cardin.
Secretary Sullivan, I just really want to just underscore our hope about how you and this committee can work together on issues in the State Department. Congress appropriates money. Congress passes statutes. The Trump administration, in some cases, have different views than that, as we've seen in some of the actions that have been taken by the Trump administration. And certainly their FY18 budget is different than what Congress did in the FY17 budget after we had the president's skinny FY18 budget. So we are a co-equal branch of government. We expect the State Department to implement what Congress has done. So when we provide you funds and provide you authority, we expect that to be carried out. The president has the right to veto. The president can do a lot of things. We recognize that. Ultimately, we want to work together. So when the administration imposed a freeze and we saw what was happening through attrition, it was having some really adverse impact. And we pointed that out with the Pickering and Rangel Fellows, and thank you. It was reversed in allowing the fellows to join the A100 class this year, and we're pleased about that. But as I mentioned in my opening statement, we have a challenge before Mr. Trump was elected president of the United States in diversity in the State Department. It's been a challenge. We've had hearings in Congress on this. We've had numerous opportunities to try to improve diversity because of the importance in the State Department carrying out its mission and its credibility globally for us to show that we do represent the global community. So can you just give us some assurances, A, that when Congress passes appropriations and authorizations that it should be carried out? Shouldn't be should, it must be carried out by the State Department. And then secondly, how you deal with the diversity issue with the overriding policies of contraction that is currently the pressure that you're under.
Sure. Well, first of all, Senator, as Deputy Secretary and as a lawyer, I can affirm to you that we will comply with the law, execute the law, follow the instructions of Congress. We are a nation of laws, and the department abides by the law. So you have my.
I know that you will do everything in your power to carry that out, and that's one of the reasons why we were so pleased to support your nomination, and we're pleased that you're there. I think it's going to be more difficult than just those words, so we wish you well.
Well, I will seize on that point, Senator, to address your second point. And I made this, I said this when I spoke to the Foreign Service Institute students. Actions speak louder than words, and I can offer all the platitudes that one can think of on diversity and how important it is. But actions speak louder than words. And what I said to the FSI students was, I expect them and you to hold us accountable for what we commit to do. I commit to doing all we can to have a diverse State Department. Why? It's the right thing to do as Americans because equal opportunity is enshrined in our Constitution. But second, and it's a point you've raised, Senator, it's not merely the face we present to the world, but it's doing our own jobs, getting input from all of the different races, ethnicities, gender. That input makes it easier for us to do our job in interpreting what's going on in foreign countries and interacting with foreign governments. It's important as a policy matter, not just as a moral matter or a legal matter. So you have my commitment on that. And if I don't follow through, you can bring me back up here and tell me where I've fallen down on the job.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We appreciate the fact that you're there, and we appreciate your commitment to these principles.
I thank you for being here, too, and I know that we're going to keep the record open until the close of business Wednesday, and I know there'll be numbers of questions, and to the extent you can answer those promptly, we'd appreciate it. I do want to balance out, to a degree, the special envoy discussion. The listening tour is complete. I know there was an outside consultant that generated a report from that listening tour, and you know, it confirmed what many of us have been hearing for years, and this is not at any particular special envoy that I direct this, but that they do more harm than good. They do more harm than good. I think they hurt the culture of our professional foreign service officers, candidly, because I think they see them in many cases as a workaround. I mean, all of us have been in organizational situations where XYZ is in a job, they're not doing the job well, so what do? We create a workaround, and it hurts the culture. It hurts, actually, those professionals that are doing their jobs well, and we know that, and they know that, and y'all learned this from this listening tour. So, look, it's kind of like base closings. I hear people talk about their special issue. You know, you got a base in your home state. It's the best state. It's the best base ever, obviously, because you've got people in your own state employed. But that's what we're hearing a lot of. I'm sorry, tonight is a special thing for a special state or a special interest. I hope that we'll do away with all of them that are unnecessary. And I think most of them are unnecessary. Okay? And I think the Foreign Service professionals believe they are unnecessary. We just had one created, unfortunately, for Ukraine. Here we have, you know, the Secretary of State says that most of these things are unnecessary, and then he creates one. Well, this person is going to carry out some important policy for our nation, right? I mean, this Ukraine issue is very important. If we're going to do that, they ought to at least be confirmed. I mean, if we've got somebody carrying out policy relative to Ukraine, which is important, we ought to be able to confirm them. So look, these positions are duplicative. They waste money. They have huge staffs. We may end up having some special envoys that are important, but just from this one senator, you know, I just get one vote like the other 20 people on the committee. I think mostly it's a waste of money, a waste of time. It hurts our culture, and I hope you'll do everything you can to do away with most of them, if not all of them. So anyway, I hope that's balancing out some of the other comments that have been made. I thank you for being here today. I thank you for your great spirit, if you will, and wanting to work with us. I think you're bringing a lot to the department that is needed at this particular time. So thank you for coming. Please answer our questions promptly. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Didn't want to do that. So how's the transition been so far? Yeah. Yeah.
But I do feel
Yeah. He seems like as we told him we were in the area, we're like, not what to do. So yeah, for sure. That's what my boss was like, are you sure you want to do this? Like, no, what's coming?
no, he's right. But it's good, yeah, it's great to be here.